I was standing at my kitchen window that Tuesday morning, washing breakfast dishes and humming along to the radio, when I saw something that made my blood run cold. My daughter-in-law Caroline was dragging a suitcase across the backyard toward the lake. Not just any suitcase. My late mother's vintage Samsonite, the cream-colored one with the brass latches that I'd stored in the attic for safekeeping. She kept looking back over her shoulder toward the house, her movements quick and jerky like someone who knows they're doing wrong. I set down my coffee cup so hard it rattled against the counter. What in heaven's name was she up to? I watched as she reached the edge of the water, that place where the grass gives way to mud and cattails, and without a moment's hesitation, she heaved that suitcase out into the lake. It hit the surface with a splash that seemed to echo across the stillness of the morning, and I watched it sink, bubbles rising up as it disappeared into the murky water. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. That suitcase had been in my family for 40 years. My mother had carried it on her honeymoon, brought it to America when she immigrated, used it to move from town to town when times were hard, and Caroline had just thrown it away like it was nothing. But more than that, I knew, the way you just know things when you've lived as long as I have, that whatever was in that suitcase, Caroline didn't want anyone to find it. I stepped back from the window, my hands still wet from the dishwater, and tried to steady my breathing. Caroline was walking back toward the house now, brushing mud off her hands onto her jeans, that pretty face of hers, set in an expression I'd never seen before. Hard, cold, determined. She disappeared around the side of the house, and I heard her car start up a moment later. I stood there in my kitchen, sunlight streaming through the lace curtains, and felt the foundation of everything I thought I knew begin to crack. Because here's the thing, my dears, I've been a nanny for 40 years. I've raised other people's children, watched families from the inside, learned to read the signs when something's not right, and every instinct I had was screaming that whatever Caroline was hiding in that lake, it was going to tear my family apart. The question was, did I have the courage to find out what it was? Let me back up and tell you how we got here, because you need to understand the whole picture. My name is Margaret, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 62 years old, retired now after spending most of my life caring for other people's babies while raising my own son, James, as a single mother. My husband died when James was just 8 years old. Heart attack, sudden as summer lightning. Left me a widow at 32 with a mortgage and a child who needed me. So, I did what I had to do. I took a job as a live-in nanny for a wealthy family in town, and I was good at it. Really good. I spent the next 3 decades raising their children alongside my own boy, teaching them manners and kindness and how to tie their shoes. It wasn't always easy, being away from James during the week, but we made it work. He grew up understanding that hard work and sacrifice are just part of loving someone, and he turned out to be the finest man I know. Gentle, hardworking, honest as the day is long. When James brought Caroline home 3 years ago, I wanted to love her. I truly did. She was beautiful in that modern way, with straight blonde hair and perfect teeth, and clothes that looked like they came straight out of a magazine. She worked in marketing, talked fast, always had her phone in her hand. They met at some networking event downtown, and James was smitten from the first date. I remember him calling me, voice full of excitement, saying, "Mama, I think she's the one." They got engaged within 6 months, married within a year. It all happened so fast. But James was 35 and ready to settle down, and I wasn't about to throw cold water on his happiness. The wedding was lovely, expensive too, though Caroline's parents paid for most of it. They lived in Connecticut, old money, the kind of people who summer in the Hamptons and winter in Palm Beach. I felt out of place at the rehearsal, dinner in my department store dress, but Caroline's mother was polite enough, if a bit distant. After the wedding, James and Caroline moved into a house just 2 miles from mine. A cute little craftsman with a front porch and a backyard that runs down to the lake. The same lake where I'd just watched my daughter-in-law commit what I can only call an act of desperation. The first year of their marriage seemed fine on the surface. They came over for Sunday dinners, brought me flowers on my birthday, sent Christmas cards with their photo on it. But I started noticing little things that didn't sit right. Caroline never wanted to talk about work, would change the subject whenever I asked how the job was going. She was spending money like water, new furniture, new clothes, always packages arriving at the door. James worked construction. Good steady work, but not the kind that pays for designer handbags. When I'd gently mention it to my son, he'd get this tight look around his eyes and say everything was fine. They had it under control. but a mother knows her child, and I could see the worry lines deepening around his mouth. I could see the way he'd check his phone and frown, the way his shoulders would slump when another credit card bill came in the mail. Then, about 6 months ago, things started getting strange. Caroline began avoiding me. She'd make excuses not to come to Sunday dinner, said she had work projects or wasn't feeling well. When she did come over, she'd barely eat, barely talk, just sat there checking her phone with this anxious, distracted energy. James looked exhausted all the time, working double shifts, and when I asked him if everything was okay with Caroline, he just said she'd been under a lot of stress. From what I asked, and he didn't have an answer. A few weeks before the suitcase incident, I was at their house dropping off a casserole. I still believe in feeding people. It's how I show love. And I overheard them arguing in the bedroom. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their voices carried down the stairs. Caroline was crying, saying something about fixing it and nobody can know. And James was asking her to please just tell him the truth. I left the casserole on the counter and slipped out quietly, my heart heavy. Something was very wrong in my son's marriage, and I didn't know how to help him. Now here I was, watching that suitcase sink into the lake, and I just knew, that whatever Caroline was hiding, it was about to come to light. Because secrets have a way of floating back to the surface, my dear. You can try to drown them, but eventually, the truth finds its way back up. I didn't call James right away. I needed to think, to pray on it, to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to march over to their house and demand answers, but I knew that would just put Caroline on the defensive. Another part of me wanted to stay out of it entirely, let them work out their own problems like adults. But I kept thinking about that suitcase, about my mother's hands holding it, about all the memories it contained. And I kept thinking about the look on Caroline's face when she threw it in the water. That wasn't the look of someone who'd made a mistake. That was the look of someone trying to hide evidence. So I made a decision. That evening, after the sun had started to set and the lake had gone still and glassy, I put on my oldest jeans and my rubber boots, and I walked down to the water's edge with a long rake from my garden shed. I'm 62 years old and my knees aren't what they used to be, but I was determined. That suitcase had sunk in a spot where the lake is only about 6 feet deep, just past the cattails where the bottom drops off. I could see it down there, a pale shape in the murky water. It took me nearly an hour, working that rake back and forth, hooking it and losing it and hooking it again. But I finally managed to drag that suitcase up onto the muddy bank. I was sweating and my back was aching and I had mud up to my elbows, but I had it. I sat down, right there on the ground, catching my breath, staring at this waterlogged piece of my family history. The latches were rusted shut from the lake water, but I managed to pry them open with a screwdriver I'd brought in my pocket. My hands were shaking as I lifted the lid. Inside, protected by layers of plastic garbage bags, were stacks of papers, documents. I pulled them out carefully, unwrapped the plastic, and started reading. My heart sank with every page I turned. Bank statements, credit card statements, loan documents, all in Caroline's name, all showing massive amounts of debt. I'm talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. My shopping purchases, cash advances, personal loans from places with names that sounded predatory. There were notices from collection agencies, threatening letters from lawyers, warnings about legal action. I found a termination letter from her marketing firm, dated 8 months ago, letting her know her employment was being terminated due to inappropriate use of company resources. She'd been fired. For 8 months, she'd been pretending to go to work while my son killed himself, working overtime to support them. There were pawn shop receipts for jewelry I recognized from their wedding photos. There were emails printed out, exchanges between Caroline and someone named Derek, talking about money, about needing more time, about keeping James in the dark. And at the very bottom of the suitcase, wrapped in its own plastic bag, was a passport and a one-way plane ticket to the Cayman Islands, dated for next week. Just one ticket, just her name. I sat there in the mud with those papers spread around me like evidence at a crime scene, and I felt sick. My daughter-in-law had been lying to my son for months. She'd lost her job, racked up debt she couldn't pay, and from what I could piece together from those emails, she'd been planning to run away and leave James holding the bag for all of it. The man she was corresponding with, this Derek, seemed to be some kind of boyfriend or accomplice. They were talking about meeting in the Cayman Islands, about starting fresh, about how James would never have to know. I thought about my son's tired face, thought about him working 16-hour days trying to keep them afloat while his wife planned her escape. The betrayal of it made my hands shake with anger. But underneath the anger was something worse. Heartbreak, because I'd welcomed this woman into our family. I'd tried to love her like a daughter, and she'd looked me in the eye, smiled, and lied. I gathered up all the papers, stuffed them back in the suitcase, and hauled it back to my house. I called James and asked him to come over after work. Told him it was important. He showed up around 8 o'clock, still in his work clothes, exhausted. "What's wrong, Mama?" he asked when he saw my face. I'd been crying. I won't lie, not just for him, but for all of us, for the family I thought we were building. "Sit down, baby," I said, and I pulled out that suitcase. "I need to show you something, and it's going to hurt, but you need to see it." I watched my son's face as he went through those documents, watched the confusion turn to understanding, turn to devastation. He kept shaking his head like he could make it not be true. "Where did you get this?" he finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. So I told him about seeing Caroline throw it in the lake, about retrieving it, about what I found inside. "She's been lying to you, James, about everything. Her job, the money, all of it. And from what I can see, she was planning to leave you next week and disappear to the Caribbean." James put his head in his hands, his shoulders started shaking, and I realized my grown son was crying. I moved over to him, put my arms around him the way I did when he was a little boy, and let him grieve, because that's what this was. Grief, the death of trust, the death of a marriage, the death of the future he'd imagined. "Why?" he kept asking. "Why would she do this to me? What did I do wrong?" "Nothing, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong. Some people, they get themselves into holes they can't climb out of, and instead of asking for help, they just dig deeper. That's not about you. That's about her." We sat together on my couch for a long time, going through every document, piecing together the timeline of her deception. She'd been fired for stealing from her company, using the corporate credit card for personal purchases. She'd taken out loans in both their names without telling him. She'd maxed out credit cards, borrowed money from her parents under false pretenses, pawned their wedding gifts, and through it all, she'd come home every day and kissed him hello and asked about his day like nothing was wrong. "I need to talk to her," James said finally, wiping his eyes. "I need to hear her explain this to my face." I nodded. "I'll go with you." "No, Mama. I need to do this myself. But thank you. Thank you for finding this. Thank you for telling me. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't." I hugged my son tight. "That's what family does, baby. We tell each other the truth, even when it breaks our hearts." He took the suitcase and left, and I sat alone in my house, praying for strength for both of us, because I knew the worst part was still to come. James came back to my house around midnight. I was still awake, sitting in my rocking chair by the window, watching the lights in his house across the way. I'd seen Caroline's car pull in around 9, had watched the lights go on in their bedroom, had seen shadows moving behind the curtains, and then, about an hour later, I'd watched Caroline carry 2 suitcases, real ones this time, packed with clothes, out to her car and drive away. When James walked through my door, he looked like he'd aged 10 years in one night. His eyes were red and swollen, his face pale. "Tell me what happened," I said gently, guiding him to the couch. He took a shaky breath. I confronted her, laid out all the evidence on the kitchen table. At first, she tried to deny it, said I was being paranoid, said you were trying to break us up. But when she saw the papers, saw the passport and the ticket, she just crumbled, started crying, saying she was sorry, that it all got out of control. "Did she explain why?" I asked. James nodded slowly. "She said it started small. She lost her job and was too embarrassed to tell me. Thought she'd find a new one quickly, but weeks turned into months, and she couldn't admit it. So she started taking out loans to cover the bills, to make it look like she was still working. But the loans had interest, and she couldn't keep up, so she took out more loans to pay the first ones. It snowballed. The shopping, the stealing from her company. She said she was trying to maintain appearances, trying to look successful, so I wouldn't suspect anything. And Derek James's voice cracked. Derek is some guy she met at a bar, told him about her problems, and he convinced her they should run away together, start over somewhere new. She said she was going to leave me a note. A note, Mama. After 3 years of marriage, after everything we built together, she was going to disappear and leave me with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and a note. I felt anger flare up again. What did you tell her? I told her to get out, Told her to pack her things and leave tonight. Told her I'm filing for divorce, and she can explain everything to a judge. He looked at me with such pain in his eyes. She kept saying she loved me, that she made mistakes but she really loved me. How do you love someone and lie to them every single day? How do you love someone and plan to destroy their life? I took his hands in mine. That's not love, baby. That's cowardice, dressed up in pretty words. Real love is honest, even when the truth is hard. Real love doesn't run when things get difficult. What she did to you, that was about her own fear and selfishness, not about love. James nodded, but I could see he didn't quite believe it yet. When someone betrays you that deeply, it shakes your understanding of everything, makes you question your own judgment, your own worth. What am I going to do, Mama? He asked. The debt she racked up, some of it's in my name too. I could lose the house. I could lose everything. We'll figure it out, I promised him. We'll get you a good lawyer. Sort through what you're legally responsible for and what you're not. You'll rebuild. It'll take time, but you're strong. You're my son, and we come from people who survive. I made him stay the night at my house, set him up in his old bedroom that I'd kept exactly the same since he was a boy. I heard him crying through the walls, and it broke my heart all over again. But I also knew he'd be okay, because he'd survived losing his father at 8 years old. He'd survived growing up without much money, watching me work myself to the bone to keep us afloat. He'd survived before, and he'd survived this too. Over the next few days, things moved quickly. James filed for divorce. With all the documentation we had, his lawyer said he had a strong case for divorce on grounds of fraud and abandonment. Caroline's parents got involved, horrified to learn what their daughter had done, and they agreed to cover some of the debt to avoid a prolonged legal battle. Caroline herself disappeared. We heard she moved back to Connecticut, but we didn't ask for details. James focused on putting his life back together piece by piece. He got a credit counselor, worked out payment plans for the debts that were in his name, put the house on the market. It hurt him to lose the house, but he couldn't afford the mortgage on his own, and it was tainted anyway with memories of lies. He moved in with me temporarily, and I was grateful for the company. We ate dinner together every night, watched old movies, talked about everything and nothing. Slowly, I watched the light come back into his eyes. One evening, about 3 months after Caroline left, James and I were sitting on my back porch watching the sunset over the lake. That lake that had held so many secrets, that had nearly kept the truth buried forever. Mama, James said quietly, I need to ask you something. When you saw Caroline throw that suitcase in the water, why didn't you just ignore it? Why did you go to all that trouble to pull it out? You could have just let it go. Let me stay ignorant and maybe happy. I thought about that for a long moment, because ignorance isn't the same as happiness, sweetheart. You can't build a real life on lies, even comfortable ones. The truth has a way of coming out eventually, and the longer it takes, the more damage it does. I love you too much to let you live in a fantasy when reality was about to crash down on you. You deserved to know. You deserved the chance to protect yourself and start over. He was quiet for a while, then said, Thank you. I mean it. I know it was hard for you to. You lost a daughter-in-law, lost the idea of grandkids from us, lost the family you thought we were building, but I kept my son, I said, squeezing his hand, and that's all that matters to me. That was 2 years ago now, my dears. I'm sitting here today at 64 years old, looking back on that whole painful chapter, and I can tell you that we made it through. James is doing well, really well. Actually, he paid off the debts, saved up money, bought himself a little condo in town. He's dating someone new, a kind woman named Sarah, who teaches elementary school and has a laugh that lights up a room. They're taking it slow, which I'm glad for, but I can see James learning to trust again, learning that Caroline's betrayal doesn't define him or his worth. He's more cautious now, sure, but he's also more confident. He knows he can survive the worst and come out the other side. As for me, I retired from nanny work officially and spend my days gardening, volunteering at the church, and being there for my son when he needs me. I still live in the same house by the lake, and sometimes I stand at that kitchen window and think about the morning I saw that suitcase hit the water. I think about how one moment of paying attention, one decision to pursue the truth instead of looking away, changed everything. Caroline sent James a letter last year, a long, apologetic thing trying to explain herself and ask for forgiveness. James read it once and put it in a drawer. He said he appreciated the apology, But forgiveness is something that takes time. And he's not ready yet. Maybe he never will be. And that's okay too. You can forgive someone without letting them back into your life. You can wish them well from a distance and still protect yourself from further harm. That's a lesson I hope he carries with him. As for what happened to Caroline, we heard through mutual acquaintances that she got help, therapy, financial counseling, Gamblers Anonymous meetings. Apparently the shopping and spending had been a compulsion she couldn't control, fueled by anxiety and shame. I don't excuse what she did, not for a second. But I understand now that she was sick in a way, trapped in a cycle she didn't know how to break. I hope she's doing better. I hope she's learned from all this and won't hurt anyone else the way she hurt my son. But that's between her and God now. My job was to protect my family, and that's what I did. I've learned a lot from this experience, my dear. I've learned that love without honesty is just an illusion. Pretty to look at but hollow at the core. I've learned that secrets are like poison. The longer you keep them, the more damage they do. I've learned that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is tell them a truth they don't want to hear, because at least then they can make real choices based on reality instead of fantasy. And I've learned that family isn't just about blood or marriage certificates. It's about who shows up when things fall apart, who tells you the truth even when it hurts, who holds your hand through the darkness and helps you find the light again. That morning at the lake, I could have turned away. I could have convinced myself it wasn't my business, that I should let James and Caroline work out their own problems. But something in my gut told me that if I didn't act, my son would pay a terrible price for my silence. So I got muddy and tired and pulled the truth up from the bottom of that lake, and I'm glad I did, because James deserved better than a life built on lies. He deserved the chance to start over with someone who would be honest with him, who would face problems with him instead of running away. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how I handled things, if I should have confronted Caroline privately first, given her a chance to come clean on her own. And honestly, I don't know. Maybe there was a better way. But I did the best I could with the information I had and the time I had to act. I protected my son, and I'd do it again. That's what mothers do. We stand between our children and the things that would hurt them, even when those things look pretty, and wear wedding rings, even when speaking up means breaking hearts, including our own. Looking back now, I'm grateful for that morning, not for the pain it caused. I'll never be grateful for that, but for the truth it revealed. Because the truth, no matter how ugly, is always better than a beautiful lie. The truth gives you something solid to stand on, something real to build from. A lie is just quicksand dressed up in flowers. It might look pretty, but eventually, it'll swallow you whole. That day, I learned that sometimes the truth may hurt, but it's the only thing that sets you free. If my story touched your heart, my dear, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because sometimes the truth deserves to be heard.